welcome to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here. What we're going to do today, just to take you through the program, is that we're going to have this feminist dialogue, and then we're all going to walk together, leaving here at 6:30 to our peace vigil, where we'll be remembering and recognizing all the women who have suffered from violence and militarism. As you all know, the mindset of militarism is pervasive across our society and globally, and it affects us in both subtle and not so subtle ways. It influences our normal conversations. We talk about bullet points and targets and rounding the troops, the clothes we wear. Some of you may have seen Gap's recent camouflage campaign, as well as the video games that our children play. It says a lot about what we as a nation prioritize and what values we hold dear. And as some of you may know, every day, $2 billion go from our increasingly scarce public resources to support our military infrastructure. Militarism also has a disproportionate impact on women and civilians. Over 80% of all refugees and internally displaced persons are women and children, and increasingly rape and forced pregnancies are being used as weapons of war.
What is it that allows somebody who uses feminist ways of explaining what's going on in the world so particularly skilled at making sense of and uncovering militarism? And what it is that feminists know that patriarchy works in ways that are normal, that are natural, all in quotes, of course, that are in the crevices of everyday routines, that are in the most intimate of relationships. Well, that's exactly how militarism works. Militarism isn't just about high politics. How do we take account of how militarism works, look at square in the face, which means also in the mirror, and then come to grips with the terrible dilemmas that face women in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and our complicity in those.
My group of women and myself, we were against the war on Iraq. We believe that it will not bring a good change. We believe that supporting the people of Iraq from the inside would have brought better changes. But in the same time, we were against the previous regime of the Ba'ath regime in Iraq, and we felt that there needs to be a new future of Iraq, but with different basis. It shouldn't have started with a military intervention. After 7 years of a so-called liberation of Iraq, we still have an article in the criminal code that allows honor killing of women. So if a man kills a woman in Iraq, it is still legal. So this democracy was not about liberating the women of Iraq, in our opinion. When tens of thousands of girls are being bought and sold, that is not the right result that should have happened in Iraq. And in our understanding, when a change starts with a military intervention, which is all about violence, it just creates, it's a perpetuating effect that creates militias, groups based on violence, and those groups eventually became parts of the current government of Iraq, and those groups are not very qualified in realizing women's rights, women's freedoms, or women's equalities.
I think I have an unpopular position here. My organization is in favor of keeping the troops in Afghanistan, and we are opposed to negotiating with the Taliban. In our shelters, we have classes for the women. Most of them are illiterate. We have life skills classes. We have literacy classes. And we have entertainment, and we have kindergartens for their children. This is progress in a country where 4 years ago there was not a single shelter for women. We believe, based on evidence of all the years we've been in Afghanistan and what is happening there now, that if the troops leave, the country will, first there'll be a civil war. The country will fall to the Taliban, all this progress will go down the drain. I want to make clear that although we're in favor of the troops, we are not pro-war. We are not warmongers. We are pro-peace. We're an organization who works in every day of our lives for peace in Afghanistan. And the question really is, how is peace achievable? Is it achievable in Afghanistan, and how is it achievable there?
For the past 9 years, women's rights advocates have been really divided in their views about the role of the U.S. and the U.S. war in Afghanistan. And what's happened is that we've been locked into a debate whose terms were not set by us, whose terms were set by the claim of the Bush administration 9 years ago that they were going into Afghanistan with a primary objective of protecting women's rights. And as a result, we've been locked into a debate between two choices, and really two overly rigid choices. Either you support Afghan women by supporting military intervention, or you oppose the war and seemingly abandon Afghan women to their fate. These two choices don't reflect the complexity of the issue. They don't reflect where a lot of us are coming from in our work, and we need to find a way out of that position. And we need to create a conversation, and I'm talking amongst the members of the women's movement. How can we both end the war and protect women's rights? How can we work towards solutions that accomplish that? And in order to do that, I think what we need to do is recognize what it is that binds us, what it is that we have in common. We're guided by the same central question: how can we seek the best means to promote women's rights? And then the question becomes, do we believe that military intervention is the best means of achieving this goal?
I've served in Afghanistan. I helped reopen the U.S. Embassy there almost 10 years ago now, in December of 2001. I'm a product of our U.S. government. I've spent my whole adult life in the U.S. government, with the exception of the last 7 years. After I resigned in March of 2003 in opposition to the war in Iraq, I've been working very hard with lots of different groups to call attention of our American public to what our country really stands for. Because the violence against women that comes out of war, something that America does all the time, is horrific. We make widows out of women. We make orphans out of children. In our U.S. military, we have men who are raping women all over the world. The rapes that go on around U.S. military bases are horrific. And in fact, they do influence foreign policy. That's why there's a great debate going on in Japan right now about whether or not U.S. bases are going to continue. It's really hinging on the issue of U.S. military raping Okinawan women for the last 62 years. And the people of Okinawa are madder than hell, and they have influenced U.S. foreign policy over it. Another aspect of this is also violence against women in our own military, where in a small, compact period of time, a woman is usually in our military between 4 and 6 years. And during that short period of time, 1/3 of the women that are in our military are sexually assaulted or raped. As Diana, she mentioned how we need to end the wars and protect women's rights. And I think that to turn it around a little, we support women's rights by ending the wars. That's really where we have to be coming from, that we support women's rights by ending these wars.
You know, the use of saving women's lives and protecting women's rights was part of the British imperialist agenda. So it's not just Afghanistan and Iraq in recent days, but it's been an imperialist agenda for hundreds of years by many colonial colonizers. I mean, feminists were talking about what were happening to women in Afghanistan for years, and nobody ever did anything. But when it became a part of the U.S. military intervention agenda, suddenly everyone wanted to care about Afghani women. And so I think we need to sort of also historicize this, right, and think about it historically. I mean, it was the U.S. that supported and brought up the Taliban to start with, and so and so now we're in this dilemma as to whether to support the U.S. or the Taliban when they were both created by the same creature. And I think we as feminists need to be very complicated in our analysis as to how do we do both. I mean, I always say this as, it's like, how do we become anti-imperialist feminists and claim that and have something that we can go out and say, this is what an anti-imperialist feminist has to say. And I'm not sure that we're quite there yet, but I think that's the place that we need to go to as to what that means.
I'm a former lieutenant commander in the Navy. I too resigned my commission in protest of some things that were happening in the military. And I think the question I would pose is that military structure is a tool. And it is the hand behind the tool that causes the destruction. And I think if I would encourage anything in the discussion is, what is the hand behind the tool? What are the social situations that allow any country, including our own, to abuse something as powerful as the military?
But our problem is that when military intervention is happening, and specifically Anglo-American military intervention, it is supporting the right-wing agendas. It's supporting the right-wing groups and empowering them to be the biggest part of the government, to have all the media tools in their hands, and they do not support the strong feminists on the ground. We have media now in the Middle East. I would say when you turn on the TV, you would see almost 60 channels, Arabic channels. If you flip it from one channel to the other, you just need to wait 3 or 4 minutes and a woman will be slapped. Flip it to the other channel and a woman will be kicked. And these are soap operas. They're not. So these institutions, these anti-women institutions that are put in place, they have all the media in their hands, and they have brainwashed a couple of generations to put us in a situation that's very backward.
I wanted to pick up on Yanar's point about ripples of violence, because the other piece that I think was present but maybe didn't get put forward as clearly as the dilemma around Afghanistan is the broader dilemma about how you interrupt violence in a world in which violence is so endemic and has been sold to us as protection. Militarism and violence against women are an ongoing system of rippling. And so as you try to interrupt it at any point, how do you make sure you don't end up actually reinforcing and depending on it? And I think we see that dilemma in domestic violence work when you try to sort out the relationship to the police. And when you use that to protect yourself, and when using it reinforces that power, as well as what you see now in Iraq or Afghanistan about how do you actually fight overwhelming militarism and violence without using violence. Maybe we have to say, maybe we have to ask ourselves this. Do we believe as individuals that no military action is ever justified no matter what? And if you believe that and you want to fight for that, do you think you're going to get anywhere? Are you going, what kind of changes are you going to make if you say no military action is ever justifiable? Or are there some military actions, are they justifiable? Can we justify a military action somewhere, anywhere on the globe? And if it's possible that we can, shouldn't we talk about what the conditions should be? Shouldn't we discuss when such an action is justifiable?
The question really is, how do we mobilize alternative power so that we wouldn't be tempted to want to have American soldiers stay when they're in place in the interest of American imperialism?
The U.S. administration is not listening to people who are pushing for women's rights. In terms of when they're actually at the table, when they're around the table making the decisions about what is going to be the war strategy, the conversation that we're having here is not something that they're really taking into account when it comes down to, you know, last week when they met in Lisbon, they're not listening to women's rights advocates on that question. So this conversation, this dilemma that we're facing about, you know, do you push for intervention or do you not push for intervention, in some ways is not reaching those levels. And I think that it's important to recognize that when we're determining what the women's movement is going to do, it to be in terms of being realistic about where we have the ear and where we don't have the ear, and recognizing, to actually echo a point that you were making, that we need to be supporting each other and recognizing that people who are doing direct service work like Women for Afghan Women and supporting women on the ground, and people who are operating in different spheres, that we have each other's ear and that we're the ones who should be working together to create solutions.